Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbites. Joining me tonight is Ben Kinsley, our co-host. Ben, nice to see you again.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. And our special guest tonight is Paul Dane, who is the Executive Director of the Vermont GOP. And we're going to be talking about the Vermont GOP. So welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you, and good to see you
Yeah.
too as well, Ben.
Yeah. Are you going to come back to do some of the shows that you had been doing before? I know you used the studio, and you're welcome to any time you want, because I think getting the message out is a good thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I did when I started as party chairman is, our cell phone technology is so great. I mean, I've cut a couple YouTube videos in my car or at my office.
Oh, perfect. Right.
But yeah, I think this is a good format too, especially if you've got a little more dialogue,
Right.
longer. Getting, like you said, getting beyond the soundbite.
Yeah, that's it.
Getting a little.
You know
bit
what? You
deeper
know
into
what? I
stuff.
explain that one when they say when I use that, and they go I say when somebody says it's free, start asking questions. If the soundbite is it's free, better start asking questions because it isn't.
Well, I think that just in general, now that we're getting off topic, but I think in general, just our society has really shortened their attention spans, right?
Right,
So
that's
if you
true.
can't get it into a 15-minute or a 15-second,
Right.
here's what this is.
Soundbites.
Soundbite. It's hard to get attention, and I think that one of the intentions of this show is to push back on that a little bit and,
Right.
and do long format interviews that no one really is doing. I mean, VPR occasionally does long format interviews, but it doesn't happen very often. And I think you really can't get very much past the surface unless you do really dig into some of those.
Yep. And I think that's
Thanks.
important for people to understand, especially when they're voting. But that's another story. So, Paul, could you tell us a little bit about your background and why the interest in politics?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Vermont. I graduated from high school down in Brandon, Vermont, Otter Valley Union High School, and graduated from UVM with a second degree or degree in secondary education, concentration in mathematics. And so that's sort of,
Nice.
I've always been here in Vermont. I didn't really get involved with politics too much until shortly after the 2010 election, when the Affordable Care Act came into play, and Vermont was looking at a single-payer healthcare system. I had experience with a single-payer healthcare system in Europe. My wife is from Romania, and she was in a tragic car accident there, was in a coma, fractured her skull, traumatic brain injury, fractured her pelvis, couldn't walk for a couple months. And I saw what free healthcare is. And the thing is, when it's free, you get what you pay for.
Exactly. Got to ask.
And so, single-payer healthcare had been a part of our past. And then I saw that, I moved back to Vermont and saw that it was following me here, and I didn't want it to be part of our future. And so that's one of the reasons I got a little bit more involved in 2012. I started following the presidential race. I got involved in the party, and Don Turner, the Republican leader at the time, had asked me if I would be interested in running. And I didn't know anything about the state house and how it worked. And I told them, there's already a Republican in my town. I didn't realize that my town had 4 members, and then we had two member districts. It was Linda Myers.
Oh, sure. Wow.
And so he explained how our convoluted 2-member district maps worked, and he recruited me to run for office. And so I ran, and like many candidates, I got beaten badly my first time.
Right.
And it was one of those. One Republican running in a 2-member district against 2 strong Democrat incumbents. But I learned a lot during that process, and I came back 2 years later and was able to defeat a 6-year incumbent.
Whoa, good for you.
I'm still the only Republican that served in that particular House seat this millennium.
Wow.
So
Did you do 1 term or 2 terms?
I did 1 term, and then I ran for re-election in 2016, and unfortunately I got caught up in the anti-Trump wave that took
I was going to
Vermont.
ask you about that later.
I remember I was knocking on doors sort of the suburban soccer mom. My district was kind of the classic suburb. And these ladies telling me, you seem like a really nice guy. I like all the things on your palm card, but I just can't vote for any Republican because of Trump.
Wow.
And I had at least 3 or 4 people who told me that. And who knows how many more felt that way.
And didn't tell you that.
And didn't tell me. Yep.
So and I think that's where we first met was when you were in the legislature.
Yep.
Now almost a decade ago. Over a decade ago.
Don't look at that.
Yeah. Try not to think about that too much. But I think that some of those themes, and we'll probably talk about it, are still plaguing the Republican Party here in Vermont, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk about those a little bit.
Yeah.
So we already talked about the your term in the Vermont House. How do you think that was helpful for the role that you're in now? And what things did you learn from that experience that you still draw upon?
Yeah, I think it's really important. We've had this disconnect in the party, between the party and the elected officials, I think. And so, when I came in, one of my goals was to bridge that gap. I remember when I was in the legislature, I didn't have any real connection to the party. I didn't really meet the chairman very much. I didn't have any kind of engagement. And so that was one of the things I wanted to change. It really started a little bit last year. Even this year, I try to come down and meet with the legislators on Tuesday when they've got their caucus, try to have lunch with a couple, just to kind of make sure I know what's going on.
Good.
What our people in the legislature are working towards, what bills they're kind of trying to put forward, so that I can be a support to them from the party perspective, and make sure that we're leveraging our social media and our email list to let Republican voters and volunteers know, here's what our legislators are working towards. So that's, I've been trying to sort of bridge that gap and get people on the same page.
You had, when you said when you were running for election, that the party is sort of like a large locomotive engine that doesn't have any tracks. What a perfect example! And you said your challenge is to lay the tracks down to get folks in the right direction. How's it going?
I think we've made some progress. I think last year we had sometimes progress comes out of conflict. We had some tension over the platform, and folks wanting to be very exacting and kind of make it a very small tight box, that if Republicans don't fit into this tight box, we're not going to support them. And the reality is that's just not going to be a path to expand the party and help us win more seats. And so I think there was an element in the party that was trying to go in that direction. And they weren't successful. That broader appeal that says, look, we want to welcome Republicans from across the spectrum, and make them part of the party, because we can't get a majority if we are trying to narrow our focus. If we're talking about who we're trying to kick out, how are we going to get any bigger? We're only going to get smaller from where we are. And so I think a lot of people saw that from just a very pragmatic standpoint, that's the path that the party has to go down. I think in the short term.
The platform has changed a lot over the years. When I first came here back in 1989 or whenever I came here, it was you're right, it was very specific. And I actually didn't like a couple of the things I read on it, and you're supposed to stand behind it, and I struggled with it, because this one is it's there if you look for it. But it's not as visible in some cases. So there's a lot of room to find your niche in this platform, which is a good thing. And I was surprised when I saw this platform. Does it change every year? Do you have a committee?
So the process is every 2 years in an election year, we'll issue basically. It's a little bit larger than a state committee, but we'll have a convention.
Right.
And delegates from various town and counties will come to the state convention. Usually we'll have a committee putting together a draft platform ahead of time. And I think this past committee, I think there was maybe 12 to 16 people
Nice.
that were meeting every week or every 2 weeks for a couple months, looking at what we had, trying to figure out what is going on in Vermont now, in
Right.
politics now, that is getting people excited and energized.
Right.
And is there a place for that? Is it already addressed in the platform, or do we need to make a place for it? And then what are things that seem like a really big deal, but they've just nobody's really talking about them anymore, and take those things out if they're not really relevant. And so every 2 years we have a smaller committee that puts together a draft, and that draft goes to the entire convention,
Right.
and people can make amendments and say, we want to add this, hey, you forgot about this, or you put this in there, we don't like it. And I think going through that process can help everyone get on the same page, because when we're all just in our social media bubbles, you think that everyone thinks like you.
They don't?
And they don't.
They don't. And then everyone who disagrees with you is got to be the minority.
Right.
And when you come together in a large group like that, and you have discussion and you have a vote, it really tends to be kind of a normalizing effect, and help you to see, all right, I am in the majority, or wow, I'm really outnumbered by all these other people who call themselves Republicans
Right.
and are engaged on this level. And we've got a good mix of people. I had a large number of legislators came to the last platform
Nice.
Convention. All of our statewide candidates who were running, who had declared they were running
Right.
for the primary had come there. So it's a process that can help us get on the same page. And I feel like after we had some tension at that platform convention, but after that, I think that through the election, folks weren't being as disagreeable as maybe we had been in the past.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's important too, because you still see people out on social media, calling out. You still see that tension on
Yeah.
social media where people are calling out, oh, that person is not a real Republican.
Yep.
They're a rhino. And I think particularly there's still a faction of the party that looks at it. If you're not a Trump Republican, you're not a Republican.
Right.
There's still a segment of the party, however big or small it is, that believes that.
Yeah.
How do you rectify that with like the statewide? Obviously, there's one statewide candidate that was successful in the past election, but also, as far as I know, like the vast majority of the elected officials, elected Republicans in Vermont, are not Trump Republicans. There's maybe one or two.
Yeah.
But they're definitely in the minority. So, like, how do you square those things of like a very vocal, what appears to be a minority in the party but is like sort of the tail wagging the dog? How do you deal with that as a leader?
I think to back up a little bit, like that tension goes both ways. Like that's the one we hear about the most, right? Is that there are certain elements, attacking the rhinos, but I think it goes the other way too. There's a lot of for I don't know how the rhinos they would call themselves, but people like that looking at the other end and calling people crazies and wacko birds. I mean, we've just created an environment that it's just escalating.
Yeah.
And I really have to give a lot of credit to Joe Benning, because he went into this election. And there were people upset with some things that he had said previously about January 6th that I think they thought it applied to a broader group of people than Benning had intended it. And he went and he met with a lot of kind of the more activist base for a long period, and I think really had started to build some bridges there. And I think that's what it's going to take, because the moderate wing of the party are the ones who are getting elected. And they're in the position of power, right? And so when they come to the grassroots or whatever you want to call sort of the more volunteer activist base, and say, look, I want your help, I want your support, I want to know what we need to do to work together. Right. I think that's where a lot of that can start. It's
they don't see. I get it. They don't see that the moderates are winning. I've had discussions with them. Well, why don't you try really recognizing your audience, and you don't have to give away or give up your beliefs, but you can frame it in a way that doesn't get them so.
Well, I think really the people who win elections in Vermont are the people that have the most attractive personalities.
Well, that's true.
You know, because I think Brian Doobie is much more conservative than Phil Scott was, and he got elected lieutenant governor.
And they loved him.
And they loved him, you know. And so I don't know that moderate policies is always going. You know, and then Joe Benning has very moderate policies, and he wasn't successful this time out. So I don't know that it's an easy. The more moderate you are, the more successful you are.
I see. Right.
You know, I think part of it is you know we haven't had a strong bench to pull from. A lot of the House or Senate members who are pretty conservative are really just happy to stay in the House.
They are.
You know, we've got folks who have served for 16, 18, almost 20 years.
Right.
That on the Democrat side, they really see politics as a ladder to climb, and everybody's always jockeying for the next position. And the Republicans are really like, I'm going to do my service, and I want to go home, spend time with my family.
Right.
So we kind of run into that difficulty of candidate recruitment because a lot of our people don't have aspirations for.
Is that
higher
because of the leadership? I think Snelling was such a strong, I mean, he was a force. When he walked into a room, if you didn't stand up, he'd stand there and wait for you to stand up. No, and when he left, he'd like, and everybody stood up. And then, of course, Governor Dean was completely the opposite. He's like, oh, just sit down. But he demanded respect. He was the governor, and you better stand up. And there was this aura about him that I just... When he passed away, I thought it was. I mean, I was so upset that he passed away, but he was a presence, and we haven't had that level of leadership for people to grasp onto. And I don't know. I was going to ask you about the bench, but it doesn't sound like there's anybody out there that could fill that. Joe is very articulate, and and you talk to him, he will explain, and you understand. But it's not that fiery. Approach. That's not who he is.
That's true, but I think Phil Scott doesn't have a fiery approach either.
No.
And I don't know if it's that Vermonters are looking for something different today than they were looking for when Snelling was governor.
Yeah.
Or just, they're just looking, I think they're really looking for people to be authentic, to be who they really are.
No,
that's how you get
the
same people voting for Bernie Sanders and Phil Scott.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
The policies are completely different.
Yep.
The personalities are completely different.
That's a good answer.
But both of those men project the true version of who they really are. And I think Vermonters
they're very authentic.
Yeah. And they know that they're being square with you.
Yep. And Bernie hasn't changed his stance ever.
Very consistent.
I mean,
Except on guns.
Except on guns.
That's
he hedged on guns a little bit.
Yeah, I just heard him the other night, and I said, Bernie, you come from Vermont, what are you doing?
Well, that used to be his response all the time. Whenever
he won 1 year on that.
Well, the NRA helped him to beat Peter Smith, and so his response was always, well, I come from a very rural state, and very shy about guns. And then he runs for president on the Democratic ticket. He knew he had to change his position.
Yeah, that was kind of a requirement if he was going to be competitive, because he had to shift a little bit.
Yeah. Yep. Ensign interviewed him the other day, and he asked him about guns, and he said yes, he would be willing to listen to some changes in the assault rifles. And I'm like, Bernie, Vermont, hello. But
I don't know how many assault rifles we have running around in our woods shooting deer, but
you wouldn't be able to eat it if you shot it with an assault rifle. It'd be all holy.
Yeah. I mean, depending on what your definition of assault rifle is.
Well, exactly.
I mean, they're firing the same bullet as other guns that people don't consider.
Right, exactly. No, that's true. And people don't understand the gun that they're talking about. They may look like something they carry in the service, but it's not necessarily. So we don't understand. Yeah. But anyway, I think. So, do you think that a strong leader like that would help, or it's just to be authentic and who you are?
I think you got to be. You've got to be authentic,
right.
And if you've got a strong personality, then you go with that. And if you're a little more calm, cool, and collective, like Governor Scott is, then that's where you.
I think what got him through was COVID.
Yeah.
I just think he handled that beautifully. I'll give him credit for that.
Yeah.
And I love that recently he put some money in the budget and said, what I want is a real climate change bill, one that we could do.
He put
I thought, well, good for
$900 million in the budget, or
Yeah, it's
$900,000 in the budget, and it was like, yep, we're going to have a real climate
A
change
real climate
plan.
change, is like something we could do.
Yeah, something we can actually deliver on. Some things, looking at the state website, a couple things that it looks like initiatives you guys have underway.
Yep.
Excess ballot reporting system.
Yeah.
Can you tell
What
us a
is
little bit
that about? Do you know that?
Well, obviously when COVID came along, there were a lot of changes to how we voted. A lot
Right.
of it was we were kind of making stuff up as we go
Right,
along.
right.
We had been in a situation we'd never been in before, and so we implemented voting in a way we had never done before. And the Vermont legislature came back and said, yeah, that universal mail-out ballot, that's going to become permanent. And so we saw that in the 2022
Right.
election. And what happened is, actually, this happened to me. I received at my home 3 ballots, one for me, one for my wife, who's a brand new citizen, and one for a person that I didn't know who they were. They were not the
Really?
person I bought the house from. And so we had done a news story, put up the page on the website that says, look, if this has happened to you,
Right.
if a ballot got mailed to your house that doesn't belong there, right? Maybe it's a college student who's moved out,
Right.
or maybe the person that used to live there, or you don't
You
know.
rented the room out to somebody, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Just report it to the state party website, and we'll compile a list, and then we'll make sure that the town clerks know that this person is on the checklist in error.
Right.
Okay. I think regardless of your position on a lot of other things, I think everyone knows that our voter checklists are not as clean as
No,
they could be.
they're not.
Yeah, that's been a
And-
complaint for years.
And it's always been difficult to know who to take off. And the fact that we're mailing out ballots to everybody means that people that are on the list that don't belong there,
Right.
that ballot goes somewhere.
Who are
And-
not
and-
here to vote anymore either.
that's right.
Dead.
Right, and
Yeah.
and before they would actually have to show up. That person
Right.
would have to show up at a voting booth
Weekend
somewhere.
at Bernie's.
Yeah. So it's like it is a different thing, right? Like
Yeah.
that ballot is not going out in the wild because that person would actually have to show up and to
Right.
claim that ballot. Whereas in the universal mail-out
Right.
ballot situation, that ballot's just out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we wanted to do is at least start
That's good.
with something that is widely accepted, that we know will improve the confidence in the election, right? Because even if not a single one of those ballots got mailed in inappropriately, let's
Right.
say that's the case, still when you get a ballot mailed to you,
Yeah.
that somebody else's, it doesn't give you confidence
I agree
that
with
we've
you.
got a good system, right? So even if there's no fraud, there's not confidence in the way that that's being done. So we wanted to say, to the extent that we can, let's identify where there are what we're calling excess ballots,
Right.
ballot that got mailed out that shouldn't have. Let's keep track of it, and then let's report it and start the process of removing people from the voter rolls that really don't belong there.
Right.
And for better or for worse, Vermont also has same-day registration.
Right.
So we really think that the bar should be lowered about how easy it should be to take someone off the list, because it's so easy to get back on.
Right. Yeah, if they make a
Previous-
mistake, they can do it that day.
Right, previously, there was like, hey, you can't take people off the ballot, because what happens if they show up on election day, we took them off, we weren't supposed to, they
Good
can't
point.
vote. But now that we have same-day registration, that's not a problem.
Right.
That person, even if they're not on the voter registration
Right.
list, they can cast a ballot.
Sure.
So we should, there's a couple of reasons that we should be more aggressive in taking people off the rolls. The first is, it costs money to mail out those ballots.
Right.
They're big, thick envelopes, right? So the first thing is the money, and then the second thing is the confidence.
Right.
Like I said, mailing those out, people getting ballots that they don't belong to, doesn't give them confidence in
Yeah,
our
I
election
agree with
system.
you.
Yeah, that's a
we
fair
didn't have that.
point.
We just had the 2, but that's, we've been talking about renting out some space, and it could be that person, and they move, and there you go.
There you go.
Interesting. So the other thing you had down was mystery tax. What was that?
Yeah, so that was
That I put a little question mark
Yeah,
next to.
so that was what I was calling the clean heat standard.
there you go.
Because it was going to be a tax on heating fuel, but we didn't know if it was a percentage or if it was a flat fee,
Right.
or how much it was going to be, or would it change from 1 year to, we didn't know anything about the tax. And we were going to give the power to determine the tax to some unelected board. So we didn't know anything about this tax other than there was going to be one. So we were trying to draw attention to the fact, not only that people are going to be paying more for their home heating fuel, right? Their heating oil, propane, kerosene, and the cost of those have gone up even more since then.
Yeah, almost 200% in the last 3 years for heating oil specifically.
Wow.
Yeah.
There was an article I read that they said $500 a year, everybody's fuel will go up because of this.
Me, I'm on natural gas. I'm immune to that.
We're going to do a lot of wood.
Yeah,
exactly. We're bringing in the wood.
But I think, so it was interesting, like the update to that, of course, last week the administration put out a number on it, 70 cents a gallon.
Wow.
Is the number, and that's a lowball number because it only accounts for, it's based off of the Senate's bill that was introduced a couple weeks ago. And it does not include any sort of financial assistance, which is assumed would be included in the bill. It only accounts for the spending.
Right. So because our LIHEAP is going to pay that tax.
Correct.
Right? So we're going to pay our own tax. How silly is that?
LIHEAP is going to, there's a LIHEAP question. Actually, they're talking about getting rid of LIHEAP now.
How can they do that?
Because it's subsidizing carbon. So they're talking about getting rid of
keeping people warm, but
or transitioning it so that it only applies to electric heating.
That's just wrong. This is from I'm sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, though, that's a whole other policy discussion.
And again, that's a policy that disproportionately affects the poor.
Right.
Rural. Because again, in my situation in Burlington, I'm on natural gas. Guess what hasn't changed in the last 3 years?
Right.
Natural gas prices. Guess what is changing? All the other sources of heat.
Right.
Right. Are all going up dramatically. So as again, if we're going to further increase the cost of propane and heating oil, this is disproportionately hitting low-income people because it's regressive, and it's hitting disproportionately affecting rural people.
I can't even believe they're thinking about removing LIHEAP. That's just wrong. Nobody has alternatives. They just have what they have.
Even if you didn't get rid of LIHEAP, this is effectively going to reverse it.
Right.
Because if you're adding a 70-cent tax plus 70 plus cent tax on top of it, like that effectively wipes out most of the LIHEAP incentive. So yes, it's a very big policy issue.
Yeah.
That we could probably spend the rest of the show talking about if we wanted to.
As a group going to fight this? I hope something like that. Where do you get the go for it, Paul? I mean, do you have a committee and they say, go take it, or is it more left to what you think is right?
Well, I mean, at this point, now that we're back in session, I take my lead from the legislators, and this is something that they're on top of. They've got bills introduced to repeal the Global Warming Solutions Act. It's really crazy.
Which is the foundation for the Clean Heat Standard, is the Global Warming Solutions Act.
Right. Yeah, we've kind of set up this frame in which we've set these goals, right, and then we create this committee that designs all the policy, and the legislature almost feels obligated to adopt it, because if we don't meet those goals, we allow basically anybody to sue the state. So the state is going to have to pay to defend it, and then when we lose, we're going to pay the other side. So we're going to pay for both sides of that court case. Because we aren't going to meet goals that nobody thinks that we can actually.
I agree.
They're just
There's something wrong with a state that writes a bill that says you can sue us anytime you want if we don't meet our goals. Who thought of that? And we passed it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think, well, on the other side of this, so it's very interesting actually, and we could spend all show talking about this, but I think something that's interesting is that there is a constitutional issue here as well. There's actually a clause in the Vermont Constitution that requires the legislature prove that a tax that they raise provide a better return for taxpayers than if the money and the funds had not been spent. So they actually have to prove a return on investment for taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, don't hold your breath.
And that is one of the things that there's a very risky proposition when you start talking about this type of bill in particular, where there's not a hard return on investment.
Yeah.
But how many times that they know they're against the Constitution and they go ahead
But no
anyway?
one calls them on it.
Exactly, because they figure no one's going to call them on it, just what you said, so they go ahead and do it. And I think they should outlaw the word notwithstanding. Because notwithstanding, it's in the Constitution, let's do this. They should eliminate that from
Well,
their
I think
vocabulary.
that's one place where the Vermont Republican Party has at least made the attempt to hold organizations that are engaged in unconstitutional activity to account. I mean, both Montpelier and Winooski passed charters that allowed non-citizens to vote when it's crystal
Unbelievable.
clear
Right.
in the Constitution that only citizens can vote. Right? The state constitution says that it retains the restriction that citizenship is required for voting, and then
Right.
it delegates to the legislature. You guys can figure out what residency means, right? In my opinion, that legislature cannot then delegate to the towns citizenship, which
Right.
the Constitution didn't allow the legislature to
And
delegate.
they use that as saying if you own land and pay taxes, that's their idea of residence.
Well, that would
Most
be.
of
I
them?
mean, does that mean that second homeowners get to vote?
Well, there you go.
Can landlords vote?
Yeah.
Because they're paying.
Yeah, out-of-state landlords, interesting.
So unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruled against us in that just last Friday. We're evaluating, based on the decision, we're taking a look at whether or not there's another approach that we can take.
They
to
voted
that.
against the GOP?
Yes, and they are allowing Montpelier and Winooski to maintain their non-citizen voting.
Watch me as my mouth falls open. How
Well,
can they
this
do
is
that
not-
if it says in the Constitution you can't?
Well, we've been allowing this for decades
Oh, so
for
it's-
college students
that's true.
who are
That's another
technically
story.
non-resident. For local elections, they can vote
Yep.
in local elections. And they can both here, and in most cases, they can also vote at home in local elections. Cannot do that in a federal election because of the national voter checklist. Like, you can only cast a ballot for a federal election
Right,
in one place or
right.
the other. But for locals, you can technically, as a college
for
student,
both.
cast in both places. Yep.
There is
But they've
something-
always had to be citizens up to this point. I mean, that's the
Oh,
thing.
the college kids, the students,
Right,
yeah.
right.
But
This
these
is the
people
first time
don't.
we're allowing people who are not U.S. citizens to vote.
And the
in
courts,
US
I have to read that. That is ridiculous.
elections.
What is, well,
No,
anyway, even the
it
courts
depends
are
on the
getting-
wording. I haven't looked at the wording in that particular. But if it says like resident, if the literal phrasing is resident versus citizen, like that is there's a big difference.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, I know in Montpelier, they were talking about it's not fair if somebody who's not a resident but owns land and pays taxes, that they don't have a vote on who's running and who's making judgment on how much they pay and that sort of stuff, but.
Yeah,
Wow,
my concern
I
with
didn't know
the ruling, the way that I read the ruling on the Supreme Court case, and I'm not an attorney, makes it sound like it's wide open, that municipalities might be able to make whatever rules they want. That if they wanted to, they could go back to requiring your property taxes to be paid, or they could allow
There you go.
non-residents to vote. We've got a potential. If you follow that decision to its logical conclusions,
Right.
It gets to a place where most people would look at that with common sense and say it just doesn't make any sense.
Well, let's
I mean,
hope so.
my position is not that we should stop those people from voting, but we should help them get on a path to citizenship.
Right.
If they're here, they're residents, and they want to be a part of the community and vote in the community and run for school board.
Make it easier.
We welcome that.
Yeah, right.
And I think we'd be better off instituting a state. I mean, my wife just got her citizenship a couple of years ago. And, we filled all the paperwork out. And we had her approved in about 3 or 4 months.
Oh, that
and
wasn't
it was like
bad.
$750
Right,
fee,
right.
So even if you had the municipalities saying, hey, for the 7 people in Winooski that want to vote and can't, and we pay that fee. Because what we've done now in Winooski and Montpelier, we've created 2 tiers of citizenship, right? You can vote on the local elections, but you can't vote on the state.
Right.
And I think we should help upgrade them from local only to becoming full voter participants. If
I
they want to
agree
vote
with
in
that.
local elections, let's help them get on a path where they can also vote for state and federal.
Well, the whole
offices.
immigration process is a joke. I mean, and they have been looking, well, sort of saying they were going to look. I remember years ago,
Oh, for since Bush was in
Yeah, right.
office.
Well, Leahy and
20
Governor
years ago.
Douglas worked really closely together to try to help the migrant farmers here in Vermont, to try to make them be legal. And I don't know what happened. They actually tried very hard, but they ran into, stonewalling.
Into D.C. They ran into D.C.
Yeah,
is
they
what
ran.
happened.
Yeah, D.C.
And
doesn't want
D.C.
you
has
to
been
change.
unable to do anything on immigration policy in decades.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there.
I don't understand why, because they put people like your wife through the ringer, and open the door and down in Mexico, and in they come. Just amazing to me. But there
And
you
now
go.
across the northern border, we've seen
Yes,
that.
I heard
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, the Swanton sector has seen, I want to say over 200% increase
Yep,
in
right.
the number of illegal border
Yep.
crossings here in Vermont.
Yep.
Like, this is not a Texas
Well,
problem, it's a
we
Vermont
have
problem now.
14 border crossings. I think only a handful are manned, are patrolled. And so the others, they can just, somebody's backyard, the farm. Nobody says anything. Wait.
Was it the restaurant or the
It's a library in
library?
The library, right,
library,
yeah.
that's right.
Well, in the opera house, there's an opera house that has the stages in Canada, and the seats are in Derby Line, I think it is.
Yeah.
And so,
There's a restaurant like that in Brattleboro where there's a line down the middle of the restaurant, and half the seats are in New Hampshire, half of them are in Vermont.
Oh.
I wonder which food and beverage tax you pay though.
oh,
Does
that's
it matter which seat you're sitting
that's
in?
cool.
Just wondering. I
There you
have
go.
questions about this.
Well, we like the Wayside because the Wayside is half in Montpelier and half in Berlin, but we've got the cash register in Berlin, so we like it.
We like it. Oh, yeah, you don't pay the extra 1%.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There, that's over in Montpelier.
So one other thing we should touch on this list and then move on is the repeal of military pension tax.
They've
That
tried
was
that.
in Governor Scott's
Yeah.
budget proposal last week.
Good for them.
Unsure what the legislature is going to do with that, but it is in the budget proposal.
Yeah, I think there's a case where last year, even though we were in the minority, only 46 Republicans, we got one of our policy positions put into law, at least partially. We wanted a 100% repeal of the military pension tax. We were able to get a repeal on the first 10,000. Okay. So it's something.
It's
We
something.
started the ball.
Right. Good for you.
Last year, Vermont was one of only 3 states in the country that taxed military pensions at 100%. So we got off of that. Like, now there's only 2. We left
Right.
them behind. We moved up. But I was just down in the legislature today, and members of our caucus already have a bill that's getting drafted to get a full repeal of the military pension
Excellent.
tax. And so you should be seeing that getting introduced. And the reason for that, too, is twofold. I mean, people think like, oh, this is, first of all, it's not very much money. I think $2.1 million, I think. is
Oh,
what one of the
really? Oh, so
legislators
what
told
is
me.
that?
So it's not very much. And if you think about if you join the military at 18 and you do your full 20 years, you get out and you're 38 years old. You still got a lot of
Right,
good
for
working
sure,
years.
right.
And so what we want to do is use this as a recruitment tool to say, hey, if you've gotten out of the Guard, out of the
Right.
Army, out of the Navy, and you still want, and you still want to continue working, and you've got specialized skills. There's
Right.
a lot of people that are in communications that are doing data security. I
Right.
mean, we need those jobs here, or those people have the ability to work remotely
Yep.
and could choose.
And they
to
have a
live in
great
Vermont.
work ethic. Employers love to look at people from the military because
Exactly right. If you put in 20 years,
You
in the
actually show
military,
up.
Yeah,
you're
you're going to
showing
quit the
up.
first
and
week.
listen,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
And so we want to make Vermont attractive to those workers, really.
Right.
And then they come and they bring their family and maybe a spouse, and we help to increase our workforce with some of the best people, the best workers in the country.
That's great. That's great. I just have to ask one more on this list. Parental rights. We're losing them, like they're slipping through our fingers, and nobody seems to be
Yeah.
worried about that. I just don't understand it. Because if something goes wrong, the first people they look to are the parents. Is there something that, as a party, that there's a stand or something that?
Yeah, I mean, one of
can you
the,
take
the
something?
most, one of the issues that we took a stand on last year during the session that got a lot of media attention was opposing this bill that was going to remove parental consent for children to receive hormone blockers.
Oh my God!
So
Yeah.
you've got these are puberty blockers. So
Right.
they're prepubescent kids 8, 9, 10.
Right.
that are getting that would be getting medication without their parents' permission or even knowledge.
Wow.
So we took a stand on that.
Good.
We made a big deal about it. We recruited some candidates to run against some of those, and many of, I have to look at the number, but Kate Donnelly, who just stepped down, citing the pressures of the legislature, was one of the sponsors of that bill.
Great.
So we, we were very clean with the material that we put out. We just said, hey, this is the bill. You can read it. It's a very plain language.
Right.
This is what it does, and here are the 10 people who sponsored it. And as people started to understand, they're like, no, that can't really be it. No, read it. It's, it was a 4 or 5 page bill. As people started to understand what was really happening, they started to get engaged. And I think that put a lot of pressure on the Democrats who sponsored it. And to me, it was an opportunity to show people that these are not your John F. Kennedy Democrats that have a majority in Montpelier.
Long time gone.
Yeah, these are some of the most extreme, far left people that you could imagine anywhere in the country. And they want to push a far left agenda on our kids. And it's got to stop. And so that's one of the reasons that the party took a stand on that. And the bill didn't go anywhere, but I'm keeping an eye on to see if it's going to come back. I'm hoping that if nothing else, that we put enough pressure on those individuals to say, you know what, let's not introduce it this year. Sometimes that's the best thing you can do in the minority, is just draw attention to the most egregious bills out there. Keep pressure on, and make sure they don't either move or make sure they don't get introduced in the next session.
Because they're very good at wording bills that you don't know what it really says, because there's a bill that comes to mind, Proposition 5 and Article 22 on abortion. You don't see the word abortion, you don't see the word on demand, and you don't see the word 9 months. And you also don't see the word woman. Instead of women, they say individuals. And what does that mean in an abortion bill? And when you explain to people what it really meant, they said just what you said. No, that doesn't mean that. I'm like, yes, it does.
I mean, it means what it says, which is that, I mean, that was, the wording could have been more clear on that amendment.
Not if you wanted it to pass.
Well, and then all you said was women's rights, and nobody explained what it said.
But that is what, I mean, it's one of the problems with that, the way that language was drafted, is that it introduced what is now a reproductive right for men.
Right, exactly.
That is zero case law behind it, and we are going to find out probably in the next few years what that actually means. What does a reproductive right for a man mean? What does that look like? And it is in the bill, the way that it's written, says that it is equal to a woman's right to
in our Constitution.
In the Constitution. So a court's going to have to interpret that, and good luck to them.
And I don't think people, they didn't understand that at all.
No.
Because all they heard was, if you don't vote yes, you're against women's rights and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, moving on. That's my one point.
So we're getting low on time. One of the things I think we want to touch on is, every leader of the party brings a different style, a different, approach, lays different tracks, to use the terminology that you used. What do you see your direction for the party? What do you think are similarities with previous leaders of the party, and what are some of the differences?
Well, I think the style that I'm trying to bring is one that is calling everyone to get involved. I mean, one of the things I've said over and over again is the party belongs to the people who are involved. If there's anyone out there, whether you think the party's too conservative or you think it's too moderate, the only way to fix that is to get involved. And to that we've got later this year we'll be involved in our reorganization process, and I hope to do a little bit more leading up to that, to talk about sort of the tracks that I want to lay down for the future of the party. But that's where it starts. It starts by getting involved in your town or your county committee, thinking about running for office. thinking about helping somebody that's running for office, or incumbents who are already serving. And my approach has just been, we want everybody. We need everybody.
Right, right.
Anybody there's 30,000 people that voted in the Republican primaries. There's 90,000 people who voted in the presidential primary in 2020. So all of those people have the opportunity to get involved, and the party will reflect the people that get involved.
Right.
If you feel like the party doesn't reflect you, it's probably because you and people like you aren't involved. And so I just encourage everyone that when we get together, we agree on more than we think. I know, being part of the legislature, I remember people outside the legislature would say, so-and-so's a rhino, so-and-so's a crazy conservative.
Right.
And I remember, when you know those people and we're working together, fighting against the same bills,
Right.
Our caucus was in agreement 95% of the time. The difference is, when you actually get down to voting yes or no on pieces of legislation, Republicans are way more unified than they want to believe. I know there's a lot of people that give Phil Scott a hard time, but you got to look at all the vetoes that he enacted that we were actually able to sustain. He vetoed the non-citizen bill. He vetoed the mystery tax, or the clean heat standard. And the governor and the Republican legislators were working together on that. And those are issues I think every Republican out there saw those and was like, yes, that's what I want my Republican Party to do. And if there's if there's more things that people think we need to be doing, we just need more people involved to get them done.
That's good. That's a good approach.
So we've already started talking about this a little bit, but what impact do you think that Prop 5 and Article 22, the two constitutional amendments, had on the 2022 election? What are your thoughts on that? It was a rough year for legislative seats for the Republican Party, really both in Vermont and nationally. But what do you think the impact of those two ballot measures were?
I think that it certainly activated the Democrats' base to turn out in a midterm in a way that maybe they wouldn't normally turn out.
That's true.
I've talked to people who saw young women in their 20s high-fiving each other coming out of the voting booth.
Right.
That's likely a connection to Article 22 there.
Right.
And I don't think that the pro-life movement did enough to really communicate what was actually happening and
I agree.
what the bill was. I think, and some of it's not just messaging, some of it's mechanics. If you look at the mail pieces that I got as the chair of the Republican Party in support of Prop 5, they were these very nicely colored, attractive-looking mail pieces, very simple, clear, bold letters. Very simple messages, and I got 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah.
And some of the messaging coming from some pro-life groups, was like a white postcard with a lot of information on it.
Right.
But it just didn't grab you as much, and so I think that kind of messaging was easily ignored.
I think some of that was about money, because there's a lot of money came into the state on the vote yes part, right?
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
pro-life people didn't have so much money.
Yeah, I mean, pro-abortion organizations across the country wanted to see this happen, and Vermont's one of the easiest places to do it because we've got so few voters in our statewide election.
Right.
So I think that was certainly a factor, and with that comes people turning out voters and identifying them with candidates who have been endorsed by Planned Parenthood.
Right.
Obviously, they have their own PAC that's got a strong volunteer base. And so we were working.
And they used that to raise money themselves, that they knew, writing the bill that way, that there'd be some people that would say no, so they used that for fundraising.
Yeah.
Well, and to go hand in hand with that, what do you think the external factors, really the Trump factor, had on that election? I mean, certainly it seems like there was a national impact, right? Most of the Trump-endorsed candidates lost. But even outside of that, Democrats had a very good midterm election year when all of the indicators, the historical trends, the economic factors, all would have pointed to Republicans having an advantage going into that election. How do you grapple with that as the leader of a state party, particularly a state that with a voting electorate like Vermont does, who I think is the lowest turnout for Trump in the 2016 election, one of them
surprise.
certainly, yeah. So how do you grapple with that, and what do you think the impact of that was?
Yeah, I think in the midterms we saw Trump was on the ballot for Democrats. He wasn't on the ballot for Republican Trump supporters. So there was a little bit of unequal distribution, right? When Trump was actually on the ballot in 2020, you saw participation on both sides go up. This side, a lot of Democrats were voting, or independents were voting anti-Trump by going straight blue, a straight
Right.
Democrat ticket.
Because there's this distrust, I think it seems like, of Republicans. Like you almost have to prove to people you're not a Trump Republican, right?
Yeah.
Like there's an inherent distrust, and like they're maybe not willing to trust you with a vote until you prove that you're not.
Right.
I think we saw that a little bit in perhaps the statewide races this year, where Governor Scott won by historic margins. The other statewide candidate that worked very hard to show that he was not a Trump Republican outpaced the rest of the Republican statewide slate by a pretty good margin. So it seems to me like that, there's this inherent distrust of Republican candidates that the candidates themselves have to overcome. And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think the other and connected to that is one of the reasons that we, Republicans, nationally suffered in the midterms is we were really clear about what we were against. We're against inflation, against Joe Biden, against the border mess.
Right.
I don't think we gave people an inspiring vision about what Republicans are for. Right? I think this is the thing that I talk to our legislators about all the time is to say, look, if we had a majority, what would you guys be doing right now? We wouldn't be complaining about this high tax or whatever bill, and I think we've got to get better about saying, look, if you've got a Republican majority, what we're going to do is we're going to put forward school choice.
Right.
So many people are unhappy with the educational opportunities that they have. They're stuck in their school. Can you imagine if we forced people to buy their groceries based on their zip code?
Yeah, right.
Right? If you had to go to the hospital that was closest to you, I mean, that's what they do in communist countries.
Right.
But that's how our education system functions, and it's completely unfair.
There's no choice. You just go.
There's
go where
no
we
choice
tell you.
unless you're wealthy. Then you've got all the choice that you want.
Right.
But if you can't afford to pay the tuition, you're stuck in a school that might be underperforming. Or even if it's a great school, but it just isn't the right fit for your particular kid. Or there's another school that offers something that your school doesn't that would really be good for your particular student.
Right.
We've got to create some of those opportunities. That's the kind of thing that we can say, look, Republicans are supportive of school choice, and if you elect us a majority, here's how your life will be better under a Republican administration.
That's an interesting point, actually, about like universal school choice. There's actually a number of states across the country that are passing universal school choice bills. The flavors are a little different than the town tuitioning program that we have in Vermont. But I was just talking to a family this week who, made choices for their kids. They were from a town tuition district, and they sent one kid to a big school because that kid had social anxiety in a small school, and they sent another kid to a small school because they had social anxiety in a big school.
Yeah.
Right? So there's all sorts of reasons why this kid does better in a small school. This kid does better in a big school.
Yep.
Social services is a great example. I saw there was an article this summer. There are required categories of special education that public schools are required to provide, but they don't always because of staffing constraints or whatever. And so this woman that was in Springfield had been battling with the school district. I think she ended up suing the school district, but she'd been battling with them for a year because they weren't giving the services to her son that she was entitled to under Vermont statute, but the school district didn't have to comply with that, because they were citing staffing constraints. They didn't have the staffing to support it. They couldn't have blah, 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 blah. If that kid had school choice, she could have just gone to a different district
Right.
that did have those services.
Well, and to me, that's the thing is school choice can alleviate so many of the other little tensions we have in our school system. Whether it's this school has a great, occupational therapist and this one has one, but they're not that good. Like, to sue the school to make them hire the other, it just gets complicated.
Right.
Or people get concerned about what their kindergartner is learning in school.
Well, and by the time that all like plays out too, your kid can be graduated already.
right.
By the time you sort all of that out.
Somebody said the other day, we were at the school choice day they had with Brad Furlan and everybody, and somebody said there's plenty of room for everybody. And it's competition, and just will elevate everybody, and it's okay. Just you work together.
And I think this is an issue we've seen Republicans win on across the country. It was one of the reasons for Glenn Youngkin's surprise win,
Yep,
flipping the
right.
Virginia House, Republicans sweeping their statewide offices. And I've been working with the legislators earlier today to draft a bill. So I think hopefully in a little time you'll see some more stuff from us.
Because we were the first state in the nation to have school choice.
1890.
And here we are, looking to wipe it out. How ridiculous is that? People need choice because every kid is different. And I really take offense. I know the religious thing is, it's not, the money isn't going to the religion, it's going to teach the kids.
Well, it's following the kids. This is there's a whole complicated
right.
policy discussion in there, but people are uncomfortable, and reasonably so, that public dollars going to a religious institution or a religious affiliated institution,
Right.
fair enough. But that's not the state choosing to send those dollars there. It is an individual choice of the parent.
Right.
That this is the best environment for my kid. No one's forcing the kid to go there.
Right.
And the state is not making a decision that they're sending the dollars there. They're just letting the decision go to
with the
to
kid,
family.
and it's about the children. It's about the kid. And I think most religious schools are very conscious of when they teach religion and when they don't. And so there's flexibility within the school. If you don't want your kid to be educated in that religion, you don't have to. They're very aware of that situation.
So in the 30 seconds we have
30
left,
seconds. So, what's new?
what do you see looking down the road? What do you see for the Vermont Republican Party in close to 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
There's going to be a time of change and realignment before we get ready to pick up some seats in 2024.
Yeah, I think it's time, because I think when people, if they understand what's happening, I think they'll figure out what to do in that voting booth. Anyway, thank you, Paul, for coming on board. This was wonderful. Good chance to get to know you. Thank you for tuning in. This is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
See you soon.